All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming to this second meeting of the Impactful Innovators class. We've got John Haller, who has had a storied career as an entrepreneur, starting at the Rensselaer Incubator and as a student in the Lally School, or at least as in a class in the Lally School, as he'll tell you a whole lot more about. I've had a chance to get to know John over the last few years, and it's got a great story of multiple different journeys as an entrepreneur, and I hope you do enjoy it.
35 years ago, I was in the Lally School. I think we were in the Pittsburgh building. Pierre Betty was our teacher. So there's Pierre when he was younger, but that was a more recent picture. But I took a principles of entrepreneurship class, and each class was started with a local entrepreneur that came in and told us just 10 or 15 minutes, a little bit about their business, some of their issues of the day, some cool things that they had done. And it was very inspiring because they were regular people and they had very understandable problems that we could relate to. And that is what really gave us the confidence and courage to start our own business, which we did right out of Pierre's class. So it's kind of neat, 35 years later, and I'm on the other side of the table to talk to you folks. I've been involved in 3 businesses over the years. The first was MapInfo, which rolled right out of this class. But the one I want to talk about today is sports sign-up story, and I think it's a little more relatable. And I went into that business with more experience and in a more thoughtful way. So we very quickly realized we had a neat idea, but there were some things that we did to decide that it was going to be a good business. I just want to kind of quick go through those with you. But I just want to give you a little bit of background on the 2 other companies, because that really set the stage for how I thought about sports sign-up. So MapInfo really started off as navigational technologies. There was a technological innovation, the CD-ROM. So before the CD-ROM, a hard disk on a PC in '85 was about 10 megabytes. So, that's gonna hold 2 iPhone pictures today, but back then was a lot of space and wasn't an issue. But CD-ROM came out and that held like 700 meg. So it was almost 2 orders of magnitude more. And when something, revolutionary like that comes out, it just enables new ideas and applications and things. And my friend Sean had this idea of, with that amount of space, you could store maps for like a third of the United States. And that meant that you could have a portable mapping system, put in a car, you could have a car navigation. So these were some of the slides I found from Pierre's class. We made this, kind of built this business plan out, how we could bring this to market. And we fell in love with the idea and we did it. Very quickly, we realized that car navigation was a thing of the future, was not a thing of the present. And so we pivoted and we had built this cool mapping software, which was revolutionary. We didn't really understand how revolutionary it was until we started showing it to different people. And it enabled a whole class of spatial relational analysis that people couldn't do otherwise. So we grew the company and met with success over the years. And by the time I left 14 years later, we had about 1,000 people and we were doing 150 million in revenue. And we're in 12 countries. And I'd gone public in '95. I left MapInfo because MapInfo is focused on the business space and the consumer market was being ignored by us. And the internet had been invented and there was some mapping going on the internet. And so we had this vision of creating a service that would tell you where things were that you're interested in that were near you. Kind of what Google does today. So it was a neat idea. We had the mapping background. We were getting into some big database stuff. I got some funding. And then 2001 happened. That was the little tech world explosion. And we didn't have any revenue at that point. And the climate for our continued existence looked bleak. So we sold the company very quickly. So that was a quick little 2-year project. So then we're in 2001 now. And I was unemployed for the first time. I had become CEO of president of NearMe, and I gotten away from the tech. So I wanted to get back to the tech. So I wanted to work on a project to learn some new platforms. I wanted to learn the Microsoft.NET stack, SQL Server. So I was looking for a project, and my son was into soccer pretty big time, and my wife was a registrar for a local soccer club. And she was doing managing the registration for the 1,000+ kids that were in the club. And it seems, like not a big deal till you get these literal mounds of paper in the mail and checks and try to read the forms and people's handwriting and try to figure out what age group they're in and try to get rosters to the division coordinators so they could create teams, and very, very tedious. And I watched her do this and realized, of course, there's a better way to do it. The web-based solution that families would register their kids and you'd pay by credit card. And so I built a system for Latham Soccer. We had success with Latham. The word got out in our local community, and all the other local sports organizations, lacrosse and baseball, heard about it and wanted to use it. So I was like, this really was just a project for me to learn .NET. But clearly we've met a need, and clearly people want to use it. So can we build a business from this? So back at RPI, this was the book that Pierre gave us and we used on how to grow a venture and write a business plan. That seems very academic and tedious, but very important. But to me, there are really 4 points that are most interesting and important to me when I look at other businesses or when I evaluate my own. And those are, number 1 is really understanding what's out there already. So I came up with this neat idea. Have other people come up with it? Have they been successful with it? So kind of see what's out there. 2 is, how do you make money? So not all ideas can generate revenue in a sustainable business. So you have to understand how you make money. 3 is, so now I built this cool thing. How do people find out about it and buy it from me? How do I get in front of them to tell them how great it is? And 4, once I build a business, how can I defend it so that if someone comes along with something cheaper or a little bit better, how do I not lose them? So we spent probably about a year building out our plan, and it all, looked good, and we proceeded and started the company. I just want to dig into these 4 points, and that's the title. I have a great idea, but is it really going to be a great business? So understanding the competition, there are probably successful people out there, maybe doing something similar to what I'm dreaming of. Is there room in the marketplace for another player? Is the market young and growing, and thus I can get in there? Or the flip side, are there people in there doing what I'm doing but not being successful at it? That's a little scary, but why aren't they being successful? So in our case for sports sign-up, it was a crowded market space. There were a lot of people like me that were on the boards or friends of the organization, and in their spare time had created a platform. But it was their side project, and no one had really taken it on as a business challenge to build something big and solid and trustworthy and dominate. So by dominate, we're talking about, market share. Youth sports is huge. There are tens of thousands of clubs across the US, 5,000, 3,000 clubs. That would be a huge business. So for us, there were no dominant players. There was no one that seemed very credible, and nobody making money, which really gets to the next point. So from point number one, it looked good for us. Number two, how to make money. So the players of that time hadn't figured out how to inject themselves in the money stream. So the models that we had seen where they were trying to charge the leagues an annual fee, let's say $1,000 a year to use their platform. Clubs had very small budgets. They certainly didn't have money before the season to license the software because they made their money through registrations. So that model didn't really work. But there's plenty of money. When people registered, I'm paying maybe $100 for rec soccer, $1,000 for Premier or travel soccer. There's lots of money. The trick is how to inject yourselves in that. So what we came up with was, this all seems so obvious in hindsight because everyone else is doing it nowadays, is charge a registration fee. So instead we give the software to the organization and you pay per registration, but better than that is we're collecting money on their behalf. We do the payouts and we just withhold our fees. So if a kid registered for $100 and we charge $1.50, then we'll pay him $98.50. If they needed $100, then they charge a little more. They charge $102 or whatever to cover their fees. So it didn't feel like the clubs were paying for it and they got to use the system. The other thing that's nice about this model is it's recurring. MapInfo is in the business of selling software, and that was a tough business because you sold to a bunch of customers, and the next quarter you get to find all new customers to sell the product to again. With soccer, every season, new kids are playing, or the same kids are playing, or clubs can have 1,000 kids every season. So if I can tap into that every season, I'm going to make my money. And nice that it could be multiple revenue streams, and there was an obvious one for these sports organizations was the credit card processing. For a club like Latham with 1,000 kids, we could make $1,500 a season on the reg fees. So credit card processing is quite the amazing business model. So these credit card companies make about 2% that the merchant pays for. So I walk into a store, I buy something with my credit card, I pay the same list price or the same price in the credit card. The merchant is paying the 2% for the privilege of getting to be sold by credit card. Volunteer organizations, small organizations, not-for-profits can't get a merchant account. So they have to go to a third-party company. Today, there are companies like Stripe or PayPal, and sort of the going rate is about 3%. So we decided we were going to become a credit card processor and make that 1% that the Stripe, the PayPal make. So for the same set of 1,000 players, for $150 registration, we can make $1,500 on credit card processing and double our revenue. So we can make $3,000 for one sports club. If we had 300 clubs, we'd make $1 million in revenue. That's sort of a magic number for a startup of trying to make $1 million. 300 clubs, we already had 10 that were interested in us in day one without even trying. So 300 seemed very possible. So we think we figured out how to make money. So the third was how to reach potential customers. This was harder. So obviously the local clubs all found out about us from word of mouth. But it's a big country. There are lots of other towns and states and things that we needed to sell to. And we didn't have a local presence there, of course. With a company like MapInfo, we went to trade shows. There were trade magazines that people that did mapping read. So it was easy to write articles or put in ads and communicate with potential customers. Sports organizations are run by parents who are just volunteering, and they're the decision makers. And who knows what they do for a living, but there's no way to find them. So that presented a real problem. what we learned very quickly was that there are these governing bodies in all youth sports. So for soccer, there's U.S. Youth Organization, there's ASO, American Youth Soccer Organization, a bunch of others. Baseball, there's Little League, Babe Ruth, Cal Ripken, Dixie. Lacrosse, there's U.S. Lacrosse. So these huge organizations, they're nationwide, and they tend to be broken up hierarchically with a national organization, then state or regional organizations. In our area, we had Eastern New York. That had about 120,000 registered players, represented all the clubs from New York City and Long Island up to Plattsburgh. And then there's the regional. So for this area in Troy, we had the Capital District Youth Soccer League. They had maybe 30,000 people under their umbrella, not that many, 10,000. And then each of the local clubs, maybe had 1,000. So Capital District had Bethlehem and Saratoga and, that region. So if we could basically sell to these leagues and get them to recommend us or mandate us, that would be the coup. So we set out to learn what these governing bodies do, and it's really interesting. They're all membership based, so the local clubs pay dues. The dues go up, and that's their revenue. And in exchange for the revenue, they create rules and they provide tournaments and they manage the refereeing and stuff like that. But basically, they have all these rules about how many kids can be on a roster and the ages and whether a player can play on two different teams or not. And there's a lot of data. So I have all these players and I need data to understand it all. And so there's systems that existed to manage these organizations. So we managed to get a meeting with Eastern New York Youth Soccer League, and they were shopping for a system because they were doing stuff in Excel and it was a disaster. And they knew they needed to use a tool, but the tools were very expensive. They were $200,000, and that was half of their annual budget. So there's no way they could afford it, but they needed some of the functionality of what it did. So we talked to them to try to understand what their problems were and what their plans were. And we asked Ray, what's your biggest single problem? If you could make one problem go away, what would it be? He's like, oh, well, that's easy. Got this travel authorization process. So if I'm a kid playing in Latham soccer and I want to go to a tournament on Labor Day weekend down in Bethesda, I have to get authorization to travel. And that shows that I'm in good standing with the league, that I've paid my dues, that I've had my concussion awareness training. And then they issue so the way it worked was to download a form on their website. They would fill it out, mail it in to the office. The office would review it, type it into Excel, and send them back a signed letter. So when Matt and I were driving home from the meeting, we kind of thought about it, and that was really technically pretty easy. So we built it for them that week, and we gave it to them for free. And they loved it. They used it immediately. And they had like one person, one of their staff of 4, dedicated to that task, and that freed them up to do real work. And that got us in. So we spent the next 3 or 4 years solving one of their problems after another, built a reporting platform for them that really did everything. We didn't charge them for it. But conveniently, their system worked a heck of a lot better if the clubs were using our system. So after year 2, they recommended the clubs use our system. And then a bunch of them joined. And then after year 4, they mandated that all the clubs use our system. It was a huge coup. They were our biggest customer. And that was what we tried to replicate around the nation. So basically, kind of what we learned there was we figured out that these governing bodies was a way to reach out the customers that we needed. And that also gets into point 4 here, is how to defend the business. Well, we we conveniently made our system work with what was in place with Eastern New York. And so it was a win-win if they all used our system if they all participated in our ecosystem. It made it really impossible for a single club to bail, and certainly for the leagues to bail. We had an incredible retention rate of like 98% when they were in an organization like this. We did have a lot of one-offs, and our retention rate was more like 92% with those. So yeah, luck into ecosystem. So the second thing we really focused on was customer-specific features. A lot of the tools out there, I'm building them for a broad audience. I'm building them for multiple sports. I'm building it for rec soccer and travel soccer. They're all very different. The organizations didn't want to adapt to the software that they're using. So we made some key pieces of our software customizable, either by the customer or by what we call loadable classes. And we made that very easy to do, kind of helped lock those customers in. The other thing was customer branding. Customers didn't care that they were using Sports Signup. They, of course, love their own brand. So we hit our brand and we made it all about them, which they liked. And then they also tended to have their own words for things, for divisions. So we let them customize the vernacular, and that also worked out. Seemed to be a big deal for them. So to recap, there are lots of great ideas out there. People always tell me about their neat idea. The challenge is, how do I make it into a business? And it just is really worth being very thoughtful about that before you dive in and take people's money and hire people. Plans evolve. You need to pivot. You always learn things when you dig into it. But trying to get out the gate as best you can is worth it. So just to kind of close by just saying what happened to Sports Signup. We got very fortunate. Business came easily, and we kept it really lean. So just because I had been burnt at NearMe with losing all of our investors' money, I wanted to be sure I didn't want to be reliant on investors. So we grew it slow. When we made money, we could hire someone else, and we hired someone else. But that also made us focus on revenue. That we wanted to add features that were going to get us the next sale to make us money so we could hire the next person. We could have gone faster if we had taken investment money, but I did like the slow and steady pace that we grew. Once we started off in soccer, and once we nailed soccer, we diversified and we got into Canada a little bit. We bought a Canadian competitor, and we were on a growth plan. We had no intention on selling, but Time Inc. knocked on our door, and they don't exist anymore. But Time Inc. used to be in the newspaper business, and one of their big brands was Sports Illustrated, and they wanted to basically get into the digital space. They understood how much money was being spent on youth sports, and it would be great to have a captive audience that you could advertise to. So they're trying to create a kind of a roll-up of different tools in the youth sports sector, and we were one of them. So they bought us ahead of when we wanted to sell, because we were only about $5 million in revenue, 30 people when we sold. But it was strategic for Time, and they paid a premium for that, and it worked out well. I stayed on with them for 2 more years to transition, because it was my baby, and I ended up leaving about 2 years ago. Unfortunately, Timing, so they created a subsidiary called Sports Illustrated Play that Sports Signup was part of. But then their CEO, who had this vision, left, and then the new CEO didn't get it, and he sold the business. He sold Sports Illustrated Play, and then ended up selling Timing to Meredith, so Timing doesn't exist anymore. And that was our crew at the towards the end there.
Yeah, very cool story. Thanks, John, for that. First off, you've gone from this starting off in more of a technical role than learning, wanting to get back to the technology, and then finding yourself in the CEO role. And I think you were really thoughtful as you approached both sides. But I'd like to just, if you could tell me a little bit about how you saw problems in both domains, and how maybe time at Rensselaer might have prepared you to think through those.
I'm a software guy, and I think I'm very software guys have an advantage in that we can kind of start a company and build a prototype all by ourselves. So, with sports sign-up, I made a lot of progress by myself, which meant no money. I didn't need any money to get a prototype out there, to start getting some customer feedback. And that's a huge advantage. I talked to a lot of people that have a great idea, but they need someone to build it. And it's hard to find someone who's good when you don't have any money, who's not already got a great job. I kind of love straddling that space, but I also fully understand my weaknesses. So once I kind of get some momentum and get the processes in place, in year 5, I hired a CEO in sports sign-up, Anthony Bruno, and he's fantastic, and we were great partners. And it let me move back into the technology position. But I had to do a lot of work to get the company to a place where I could attract someone like Anthony Bruno to be my CEO. I like kind of going out of my element and learning the finance and talking to customers. And I think I build a much greater product with that experience. But when push comes to shove, I kind of like to retreat back into the technology position.
And you started as a math major at Rensselaer. We had, I don't know if anybody from the math community joined, but we made sure that we did get the announcement out to the math majors.
Yep.
Nice. We've got a couple questions here in the chat. Anton, do you want to jump in and ask your question?
Hey, so throughout the making of your second company, Signup Sports, did you end up, I guess, especially in the beginning, did you ask for help from anybody, or did you have like sort of a mentor, or were you just kind of doing it on your own and you just knew what you were doing?
So yeah, great question. For the first company, MapInfo, we had many mentors. We were young. We didn't know anything. We didn't understand how to prioritize things. We got excited about the wrong things. And so we fully embraced mentors. We met, I'm going to say it was every Saturday morning. We met, from like 9 till noon with our mentors. They brought us pizza. And it was kind of a reset for the week. And we absolutely would not have made it past year 2 if we didn't embrace advisors. That sort of changed. I relied less on advisors with sports sign-up. I was 20 years into it, and it was kind of a smaller venture. I did rely on, I didn't understand the market. So I needed Matt Scarkelli, was my soccer guy, to educate me on the industry. And so he really helped me out a lot in the first years. And I have my network of advisors that I leaned on, less often. They weren't buying me pizza anymore. I'm a huge fan of partners. I think people who go at it on their own are crazy. I started Sports Sign Up by myself, but quickly I brought in Matt Scarkelli to run the sales side of it. And then as quickly as I could, which took 5 years, brought in Anthony to round out our executive team, but fully planning on that from day one. You need people that are good, are experts at different areas. And by spreading the load and responsibility, you can get so much more done. But of course, you have to have a nice working relationship where you trust them, which we did.
Great. Numfor, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. So talk a little bit on the trade-off between taking money from investors and how that might impact the growth of your business. So could you highlight that a little bit more?
Yeah, everybody thinks you need money from investors to start a business. And, to some degree you do. You have real expenses, you need money, but there are different trajectories you can grow at. And the reality is it's hard to get money. If you have friends and family and you have a reputation, then maybe it's easier. the more progress you can make on your own, the better. So you'd love to start getting some customers and hit some milestones before you need money. Of course, getting money is great because an investor can bring resources and contacts and new ideas. Sometimes they'll want to be on your advisory board or on your board. So it's nice to grow out the team. But, I had a tough time with my second business when I had investors, and now you have to be reporting to them how you're doing, and they're second guessing all your decisions, and especially when things aren't going well, which they weren't for me at NearMe. It's tough. And then, you got the bad news that you're going out of business or whatever, and leaving them high and dry. My advice is do as much as you can with as little as you can to get as far along as you can. And then everything is easier after that. Doors start opening when you have successes.
Julia, do you want to answer or ask your question?
Sure. So I was just wondering for a sports sign up, once you start to scale up, thousands of players, 10,000 players, I was just wondering how did you handle the server side of things for overloading and technical roadblocks?
So we approached everything with the mindset that we were going to be wildly successful. So we built everything big. We anticipated having millions of players in our system and thousands of customers that we had to do settlements for, credit card settlements every 2 weeks. And so when we built it with an eye to that. And I had I built the first version, and I'm kind of a hack, so I can get stuff done. I wouldn't hire me as a programmer, but luckily I hired a great programmer very quickly. And then the second one, 2 years after that. So I had a really good team, and we understood that, we were building big, so we built tests and we built, sample data sets with large amounts of data to make sure it all worked and things were scalable. And we really watched, how these algorithms, we had a lot of data matching algorithms because our clubs submitted rosters up to the governing bodies and we had to match players. And so we really watched how efficient those algorithms were and how well they would scale and stayed ahead of our growth. I do know a lot of companies that it works great with you when you don't have any customers, but then you start getting some customers and things fall over. So yeah, good question, Julia.
Just to follow up on that, you were starting sports sign up in a time when the cloud was really just becoming a thing. And I think Sean was your partner, sometimes gets credit for that term cloud computing. But I'm just curious with sports sign up, were you cloud first, where you essentially never had any servers, or did you start with servers in a place that you rented them? And how did that transition work?
AWS didn't exist yet. So, but you could rent, servers at Rackspace or wherever. In fact, we started with LogicalNet, the local hosting company, because I knew Tush. So we started with some servers over there. We moved to Rackspace. AWS came out. We moved over to there. Yeah, the tooling just got better and better every year, and it would save us. As the requirements on our business grew, especially because we're doing credit card processing, we had to be PCI compliant. The rules kept changing, and all of a sudden we really couldn't do that at Rackspace. We had to move to something like AWS.
Adi, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Yeah. Hi. So you mentioned that on the first day you managed to get 10 new customers, but when you had to start actively advertising sports sign up, how exactly would you go about that? Because since it's technically like an administrative level software and product, how did you advertise and target towards people that were in that position?
Yeah. So just to clarify, we didn't get 10 customers in the first day. We did get interest from that first year And that kind of let us know that we were onto something. But you're absolutely right. It was very hard to go find who we had to contact that was going to make the purchasing decision. And that's how we ended up going down the path of selling to the governing bodies. Basically, the governing bodies would endorse us, or they would invite us to their annual meeting, and we would get to pitch to the 200 clubs or the 500 clubs that showed up. So we kind of tried to move away from direct selling and move to the indirect selling using the governing bodies. We did both. We can go to people's websites and, Bethlehem Soccer and see who the registrar is, and then try calling them. And we did hire salespeople that would cold call into organizations. We'd find the big ones. Didn't cost us any more money to host a big organization or a small one. So you'd go find these huge organizations throughout the US and we would cold call into them. And it was a hard sell. It was just someone calling. It was a much easier sell when the governing body endorsed us.
Tyree, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. So my question is, so I've had experience with small businesses and some of my friends have too. And so one of the things that we always talk about, they always want to self-appoint themselves as CEO. And so when you mentioned that you went out and found a CEO, it kind of just sparked. So I just wanted to get a little bit of your thought process behind what are the decision making that went into actually finding someone for you?
Yeah, it's fun when you start a company to, there are 4 people, so let's give us the 4 top roles in the company. But it's also really good to recognize what your proper role is. And so we always, drew org charts that, our first org chart probably had 14 boxes on it. That organizationally, we had someone who was in charge of customer service. We had someone who was in charge of finance. We had someone who was in charge of customer settlement that reported to the finance person. We had, our direct sales, and we had our reseller sales. The fact was there were only 3 of us. So my name was in, 6 of the boxes at the moment, but would get replaced by people as we hired the right person for each job. You have to be able to have your ego in check to recognize when it's good to have someone over you. And as an owner and a founder, you can always be on the board. You can give yourself a role that sounds important, but maybe isn't running the company. But if you're not the right person to run the company, you're not doing the company any favors by staying in that position.
Hi. You had talked about, being in tech during the .com boom and having a company during that time. What was that feeling like? Because I know there was a lot of hype and, high expectations during that point in time.
Well, it was fun. It was a neat time, but it was, we were reckless, and I think the industry was reckless, and I'm glad it corrected itself, because we weren't doing anybody any favors with our little company that we thought was, hot stuff, hiring our developers and having neat office space and everything. It just, because the money was easily available, we could get meetings easily, and there's just everyone was so interested in everything. It was easy to not be focused on the important things like making money and who's your customer and how do you make your customer happy, and we'll figure it out later. We'll make it free. We'll get some customers. We'll figure it out later. That's not a good answer. It wasn't then. It's not a good answer now.
Just a follow-up question on that. So you started several companies within the capital region, tech-based companies. Just wanted to see if you could comment on, things that this region might have helped you with, things that, you kind of wished at different times you would have been in Silicon Valley. How have you seen the trade-offs of starting a business here?
We're kind of in our own little bubble here, and I didn't appreciate how amazing San Jose was till I went out there, and you go to these little events at night and the people you bump into, and it's like, oh my God, it's just hard to replicate that here. But people are so much more dedicated here. So we hired, I've hired 3 teams of people over my 3 companies. And we had lifers. We had people that joined us and never left. And we relied on them and they relied on me. We created more than, it wasn't just a job for me. It wasn't just a job for the people that worked with me. It was more than that. And that doesn't really happen out in San Jose. People work for 4 months, they get a job offer for twice as much. And they have no allegiance whatsoever, which is just, I don't know how you build a company when you can't keep people. So I think it's hard to get people here, just not as many. But I much prefer this type of environment than the reckless mayhem of California.
So if you were a freshman at Rensselaer now, what do you think you might be working on?
I'm still a tech guy. I love, and to me, there's so much data out there now that everything's generating data. And so data analytics is really interesting to me. And I've come up with a couple of I'm kind of trying to figure out what to do next for me. And the things that seem interesting are things that make sense of a lot of data. For 2 years now, it's the longest I've been unemployed. I was assuming after a year I'd just be so stir crazy and jump into my 4th venture. But at the moment, I'm kind of enjoying not being. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work starting a company. So,
Julia, you want to ask a follow-up?
So I was just wondering, how did you meet a very close mentoring group? And the second question is, you said you mostly do everything coding side on your own. So I was just wondering, what was the process when you learned the tech?
So your first question was how do we find mentors?
Yes.
Our first ones really came through RPI and our RPI networks. And so RPI has been a great resource for finding people that are interested in, people that have had their own businesses or whatever. There's a nice network of people. There are people in the community that have extra time and want to help. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up there. Was Mike Marvin in that pizza group?
Yes, he was.
I've heard a lot of good things about Mike and the different things that he's mentored that early crew of startups that have had such an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, he was our first adult, we say, that believed in us and really encouraged us to start the company and guided us. And your second question was, how do I learn new tech? Well, being a tech guy, tech's fun. So there's, I love learning new stuff. And so I tried to learn it kind of in my downtime and try to stay lately proficient. When you grow a business, the hard thing is that the technology is changing so fast. And so you kind of are going down one path to not be too distracted by a lot of the new tech that's coming out. You have to decide what's for real. If I start using this new technology, am I helping myself or am I hurting myself? So good programmers are always interested in that. And the programmers that I hired would kind of come to me and say, hey, TypeScript, I think we should use it. Shoot, sounds like they don't want to work on what I want them to work on. They want to work on their own thing. So, it becomes a negotiation. Well, what is it? How's it going to help us out? And kind of talk through it. And we decide, okay, let's do it. Let's use this new technology. Let's start using, DynamoDB instead of Redis for X, Y reason. It's good to stay current and be aware of the new technologies and decide when to jump on board.
Thank you all for joining. Thanks again, John. Thanks for everyone who joined in.
Next week, we have Bill Fosnight, who has some really awesome videos and talk to share with us. He's working on a really cool innovation that we're all benefiting from because it's been deployed in Walmart. Tune in. This mechanical engineer has a lot to tell us and some really cool videos.
Good night, everyone.